It's an opportunity to make music and try to share that with people, which as a classical musician, just for me as well as for any other classical musician, all of our futures are in question. And the idea of being able to continue the way that I was working before, in fact the idea of having the organ travel around the world itself is totally thrown into disarray for me. So basically, I would play in a train station or a factory hall or anywhere that I had the chance to at this point. So this is one of those artistic chances that you take for its own sake. I'm just here to try to continue to make music, and particularly my own wish, of course, is to show this organ in its best light and to really celebrate it as a great organ and demonstrate it for people who perhaps haven't heard it before. The organ determines the program, and the Asbach-Gasse, of course, determines the installation of the organ, but the organ is highly malleable. We can adapt it to almost any circumstance, and that's very freeing because it means that I can simply play the music that I would wish to play, or the music that I feel is relevant at that moment. In this case, I'm attempting to create an interesting hour. I'm always more concerned about playing for the person who perhaps not only doesn't know what they like, but has no exposure to classical music at all. And people who don't tend especially not to have any exposure to the organ, because the organ, of course, is a tiny microcosm of classical music, which itself is just a fractal tiny microcosm of all of music and of all of human expression. We're not talking about a concert that occurs in person. We're talking about something that someone watches at home. And so the question in my mind is it really worth watching at home? And therefore the concert itself needs to be pretty extraordinary. There's a lot of talk about the red line or the arc. Perhaps those things exist. I find personally that the arc is within the listener. It's like everything with classical music. There is no real authority that can be ascribed to any one person or way of thought. The music will mean different things to every listener. It's incontrovertible. That simply will occur. The program that I could play will mean one thing to a certain person, and it will mean something else to someone else, and it will probably mean something else or some combination of other things to me. The transcriptions that I write of music that wasn't written for the organ, for instance, orchestral music, in those cases I'm going for pieces that are just attractive to me for some reason. I like the mainline 19th century, 18th century composers. There's about 300 years of music there that really is what I'm passionate about. As a performer and as someone who wants to listen to music, I want to hear melody. I want to hear ideas that are presented and developed, and I want dramatic conclusions and quiet moments. But nevertheless, it's the sort of intuitive, basic emotion of the music. That's what we want in music. At least it's what I want. And so when I'm making a transcription, I'm trying to bring a work to us in the concert that simply wasn't written for the organ. And so what that requires is that you simply take the notes that were written, say, by Wagner for his Meistersinger Overture, and you transcribe, which is to say you remap them. My attempt in making a transcription like that is to make sure that all of the notes that Wagner wrote get played. But of course he was writing them for 80 musicians, and no one of them was a keyboard instrument. So there is a certain amount of compression, I guess is the word you'd say, that takes place where you have to look at the structure of the music, figure out a mechanical way to enter it into the organ, and then you create combinations in the organ's memory, which provide the right sounds on the right keyboards at the right time. And when it's done well, you have the same sense of drive and that kind of rolling lift that occurs when an orchestra is playing all together. I mean, there are obviously technical challenges. It's hard to do. Music that's written for non-keyboard instruments tends not to be idiomatic for the keyboard, so you might have to do things you wouldn't do in, say, a Brahms piano piece or whatever. But I wouldn't describe it as difficult. I mean, it's actually a pleasure to get to do those things, because what you end up doing is actually copying out the music that the great composer wrote and then reprocessing it for your own instrument. But in the process, you have to know everything that the composer wrote. So of course it's difficult from the standpoint of that it takes a lot of time and effort and concentration. But it's not difficult, because it's the real joy of being a musician in that moment. For me, that's one of the pleasures, not just of playing the organ, but of getting to understand at least a little bit of the language of music. You have the ability to put your hands into and interact with these ideas, and you can see the ideas living in front of you, as though they were created yesterday.